One of the best ways to support this show is to share it, and now you can earn rewards for doing so. If you refer 10 friends to China Talk, you'll get a limited edition China Talk mug or a hand-drawn postcard of your favorite Chinese leader drawn by yours truly. That's right, your own special mug or a one-of-a-kind drawing, simply for sharing China Talk with your friends. All you have to do is sign up to get your unique referral link and then share it out. Think email, text, Facebook groups, DMs, GroupMe, however you want to do it. Just tell people why they should check out the show. Look for the link to sign up in today's show notes, or simply go to refer.glow.fm/ChinaTalk. You've got until the end of October, so refer as many people as you can. And now, 30 seconds of musical interlude to go and start referring your friends.
Mara Vistendahl is now a staff reporter at The Intercept and author of the recent The Scientist and the Spy, which we talked about a few months ago back on China Talk. Mara, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So Mara, who's Ambassador Terry Branstad?
Terry Branstad was the U.S. ambassador to China from 2017 when he was appointed by President Trump until just a few weeks ago when he returned to his home state of Iowa. Before becoming the ambassador, he was Iowa's longest-running governor. He was governor starting in the early 80s and then until 1999. And then he left and then ran for office again and became governor from 2011 to 2017. For most people, Terry Branstad is the one person who has occupied that position for most of their lives.
He also, of course, hung out with Xi back in the 80s, was it?
He developed this kind of friendship with Xi Jinping when Xi visited as part of an agricultural delegation in 1985. Xi was then a Hebei province low-level official, went on this trip to Iowa. Terry Branstad was a young governor at the time, and they kept in touch. At some point, Terry Branstad told Trump this story. He and his son, Eric, had also been very helpful on Trump's campaign. And so then when Trump was trying to come up with who would be ambassador to China, he thought of Terry Branstad.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of parts of this story just go back to Trump logic, which is that family is important and personal connections matter and nothing else does. So
I should add that my own family got caught up in the Iowa-China sister state relationship. My grandparents actually were professors in Hebei province as a result of that relationship. Yeah. But unlike other people, we did not get rich on that relationship.
Yeah, that's what you tell everyone, Mara. So can we get some stories from your grandparents? What were their reflections on that experience?
My grandpa wrote a book that, like a photocopied book that's stapled together and distributed to family members.
So it's 2017. We have Terry Branstad in Beijing. His son starts working for the Commerce Department and then leaves after a few years and goes into lobbying, government relations, whatever. So how does this all tie back to what I think is one of the more puzzling things that's happened in the U.S.-China relationship, where the Commerce Department, where Terry Branstad's son was working for, initially had this huge decision to, in essence, kill the company by stopping anyone who has U.S. components or any U.S. firm from doing business with it. ZTE, of course, is a telecom provider. But then a day later, Trump tweeted, we have to save Chinese jobs, or too many Chinese jobs at risk, and directed the Commerce Department to ease off on the decision it had made against ZTE, which was done at the first instance for, I believe, violating sanctions, particularly with relation to Iran and North Korea as well.
A month after the initial denial order, Trump tweeted that he was worried about jobs being lost in China.
I remember going on Weibo that day and reading comments of people just being so confused. And I was hoping that there would be some good memes, but it was just too it was just too like earth-shatteringly odd a thing to happen for people able to be even to be able to wrap their heads around it. So,
because he had campaigned on bringing jobs back from China.
For sure. So, Mara, how does this all loop back to Iowa? And what have you learned in your recent reporting that sheds a little light on this puzzling turn of events?
So, my co-reporter at The Intercept, Li Feng, and I found that shortly before this denial order came down from the Commerce Department, a lobbying firm called Mercury Public Affairs had hired Eric Branstad as a lobbyist. After the order, ZTE hired Mercury to lobby for it. All of this was known before, but what was not known was that Eric Branstad had some involvement with the registered lobbyist on the ZTE account and then went to China with him to meet with Chinese government groups. They went to China in June of 2018, and then in July, the denial order from the Commerce Department was lifted, and the Trump administration struck a deal with ZTE. It's not clear that any of this is illegal. The optics of it are pretty bad, though. Eric Branstad's father was the ambassador at the time. Lee and I did talk with him, and he told us he stayed off the China accounts. He was aware that it would have appeared bad, to say the least, for him to be working on China at the time when his father was ambassador. But we asked him, what are you doing at these meetings? Why were you meeting with these groups? One group, by the way, has ties to the United Front, the arm of the Chinese Communist Party that seeks to expand the party's influence. And he said these meetings were really about culturally connecting, making friends. And I was there on my own dime.
Is he like a musician or a painter? Is he bringing anything to the table on cultural exchanges?
This does appear to conflict with some of the messages that Mercury sent internally, because after they returned from the trip, it told people that Eric Branstad and Brian Lanza, the other lobbyist who was registered on the ZTE account, were seeking to expand Mercury's operations in China, and that they'd had a fair amount of success there.
Gotcha.
The other thing I would say, our story came out at a time last week when there was a lot of focus on the activities of Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, and the Trump campaign has really been drilling down on the message that Hunter Biden has these problematic ties to Chinese businesses. And the New York Post story with supposed emails from a laptop believed to belong to Hunter Biden from this kind of questionable source had come out. And yet our reporting makes clear that the Trump administration also has a number of problems when it comes to influence peddling and to questionable ties to Chinese organizations. So the issue here being that both Eric Branstad and Brian Lanza, who was the registered lobbyist on the ZTE account, were advisors to Trump's 2016 campaign. Eric Branstad is now working on the 2020 campaign. So in addition to being the ambassador's son at the time, he was also a former Trump campaign advisor. He was somebody who had served in the administration, and he was somebody who is, by most accounts, very close to Trump.
Yeah, Trump has said nice things about him.
Oh, yeah, just even
off the cuff, yeah.
Last Wednesday, like last week at a rally in Iowa, he went on about how Eric Branstad is better than his father.
Which maybe he's better at some things. So what is iFlyTek, and why did it merit the feature treatment on your end?
So iFlyTek is pretty well known within China. It's a big AI company. A few years ago, it was named to this national AI team, along with Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, the big three. And it's most known for its voice recognition and voice synthesis capabilities. So it makes this really actually pretty cool device called the translator, where you just speak into the device and it speaks out in another language. Of course, works best for Mandarin, but they have it enabled for a whole bunch of other dialects and also for the major world languages. One of the things that iFlyTek has become really good at is handling dialects, and so accents fall under that. They have, and this is where its work becomes more problematic, is they've also made this big effort to conquer the minority languages and to master particularly languages like Tibetan and Uyghur.
Before we get into the sort of minority regions angle of this, could you talk a little bit about the founder and his initial motivation for creating this company in the first place?
So unlike most of the major companies that are working on biometrics in China were founded fairly recently, iFlyTek was actually founded a lot like the other big internet companies in the late 1990s. And the impetus was that IBM had developed this technology called Via Voice, which was a piece of software that you would install on your PC and that could do some very preliminary dictation in Chinese. And, this was a time, if you can think back to the 80s and 90s, for people who typed in Chinese back then, input was pretty complicated. Now is very sophisticated. It's actually pretty fast to type in Chinese, but back then it was somewhat cumbersome. And to be able to use your voice instead of having to essentially look up the character on the keyboard was a huge shortcut. And the developer of Via Voice was actually a Chinese-born researcher who had moved to the US. He understood that potential. And when it came to China, it was a big hit. And there was a young PhD student named Liu Qingfeng who thought, basically, I want to do this for China. So he started iFlyTek out of the University of Science and Technology in Hefei, which is a great university, but Hefei's a provincial backwater. But he kept the company there, kept labor really cheap, and it is still there today. And they have since expanded into all these other dialects and areas.
So it's interesting because initially in your piece, he has a quote where he said, "Voice is the foundation of culture and the symbol of a nation." And many people thought foreign companies had us by the throat, which if you think back to the late 1990s and you think about voice recognition, it sounds ridiculous. But come to 2020, IBM is not going to be taking a contract to map every Xinjiang person based on the way they speak, which is something that iFlyTek has the capacity as well as the willingness to do so now. So the sort of indigenous development of this technology, even if it's comparable to what Western companies have produced, there is like a real advantage from the Chinese state's perspective to be able to work with domestic companies to do this sort of work.
So there are companies in the West that are pretty tied up with the military or security state here. Nuance, for example, makes systems that are used by police. Voice recognition is also used in prisons in the United States. But iFlyTek is in a unique position. The way these relationships work is they get access to the government data. It's money from the government. It's a secure source of income for the revenue for the company, but it is also a huge trove of data. And if you get it from all these different areas, it can become very rich. So iFlyTek has done a number of projects with either local public security offices or with the Public Security Bureau nationally. They have a big lab set up in Hefei that's working specifically on developing a voice print recognition database. The idea that you would have a snippet of a phone conversation or of other audio, and that you would be able to identify the speakers by the unique sounds of their voices. It's not clear how far along that is. There are a lot of obstacles to actually doing it correctly, but the ambition is there. And iFlyTek's probably the company that's best positioned to do it for the Chinese government.
Yeah. And just for the conspiracy theory minded out there, another sort of enormous pot of voice data is, of course, in video games. And Tencent, owning Riot Games and invested in many of the largest gaming companies around the planet, could potentially build that sort of database on folks outside of China without too much of a lift, given how much time we all spend yelling into our computers about how the carry isn't pulling their weight or what have you. Neither here nor there. But Mara, what's the U.S. government's current attitude towards iFlyTek?
So iFlyTek is on the Commerce Department's entity list, just to bring it back to the Commerce Department. For
have they or have they not hired young Eric?
So we're getting pretty close to Brian Lanza, because Eric Branstad's colleague at Mercury, because Hikvision has hired Eric Branstad, and they're also on that entity list. It's a big swamp out there. They've kind of, at this moment where there've been these sweeping orders affecting TikTok, WeChat, and more still being floated, iFlyTek has slid under the radar, but they are on the entity list. They also, until pretty recently, had this big collaboration with MIT, with a big artificial intelligence lab there. And that was only, MIT said that the lab was kind of scrapped only earlier this year. Coincidentally or not, as my feature article was closing, they came out with this announcement that they have scrapped that partnership.
All right, Mara, thanks so much for coming on China Talk.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for having me.
把你的思路整理再访问，让情商稍微顺着脊椎盘爬山。Baby， 你哪带着关乎我看法热？和未来如果我还年轻的话，聚光灯下 I'm getting trash， 西装配的球鞋漫步在那乐曲方面 feeling fix， 不要拿起你的장치跟我配，你的问题根本没有意义 ，Cause you never been there， 别想牵着我的鼻子 OK， 伤心的人了他的判断，我的身价我是电，你的票可能在家里跟我炫，别在我的面前满着心情 party， I don't care， 你们都在说我变了的骗子，我看不见的骗子，杜撰骗子我的话别新闻电视上播报的现实也是套我链子。看到 money I don't really wanna take a picture when the time and it's obvious， 告诉你们我的脾气真的超级大，不你再讲句话骂你了，不要再来报道我的人和事情，不要再来关注我的个人隐私，不要为我费尽心思，不要再来请你不要再你的态度太过恶劣，是来新的坚持拜拜，不想通过你的加工费力经营，为曾是之中我都最自信，从你千里之外就像飞鱼期。What do you wanna know? I'm reversing myself. Right. What do you wanna know? What do you wanna know? I'ma never say my 让开，体质还好玩的别躺着听着我的 beat 发呆，中意押韵也乖宝教材翻拍，中文说唱的多可以叫我翻拍拍帅，关注我胖没胖起来，忽略掉我在行走的胖起来，嘿音乐听不懂要失败，我写个和歌让你跟我唱起来，也不累了，提供尖叫的儿歌要不要 ？Baby 小力量，不想让会满上第几档，我在这堂也不会太甜，就不喜欢我也没有在嫌，拿什么奖应该找我代言，无论天空我都有麦田野 ，You are my 朋友 for sure， 为了开心 I'll make it song， 就把我连美模的美的造型这边谁的定格过在衣服的造型，你是说照像fashion一样，除了模仿没事更冒 respect my respect， 怎么率先走 T 台，怎么还抄袭 my flow？ What do you wanna know? I'm the first of myself. Hey, what do you wanna know? What do you wanna know? I'll never say myself. 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 I'm a pig. Never say myself. Never say myself. Never say myself. Never say myself. I'm a pig.
So my in-laws just called to let us know they're on their way over and we're out of food. Great. Luckily, Instacart helps me get groceries delivered in as fast as an hour. Plenty of time to cook an in-law worthy meal. Now, what to make? Chicken parm. Perfect. Download the Instacart app or visit instacart.com to get $20 off your first order using the code PREPARED20. Now the only thing to worry about is dinner conversation. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $35. Delivery subject to availability. Additional terms apply.